Welcome back to Gcse History. This is the second video in a two-part series about the problems Elizabeth I had at the start of her reign. This is a mini lecture video, so there will be some key prompts coming up on screen and I will talk around them so that you can jot down some notes. In part 1 we covered money, threats from abroad, marriage and succession. In this part 2 we'll be covering Privy Council, legitimacy and gender, religion and creating peace and prosperity. These videos are suitable for all GCSE programmes in the UK. In particular, this one is geared towards the Edexcel specification. Please double check with your history teacher to ensure that the material covered in these videos matches the specification of whichever exam board you are using. You can set out your notes however you like. Some people prefer to do them linear style with bullet points one after the other. Other people prefer to use a spider diagram like this. So for example, I'm just going to write Elizabeth's problems in the middle there, and then I will add the different topics that we are covering today. There are some blank ones on here for the previous video, and obviously you can write much more neatly than I do. There we are. So in this video, Elizabeth's problems will be covering choosing her Privy Council, legitimacy and gender, religion and peace and prosperity. Now you've got your note-taking framework set up, let's move on to the first topic. So, choosing her Privy Council. The prompts I've given you are, what was it? What decisions did Elizabeth make? The Privy Council was Elizabeth's most important part of government. The Privy Council was made up of men who were chosen to be her advisors or as heads of the various government departments. For example, a Lord Treasurer was appointed who oversaw the Exchequer. If you go back to video 1 when we were talking about money being a problem for Elizabeth, we mentioned the Exchequer there. These advisors or heads of department met frequently, sometimes daily, and advised on all big decisions of state such as war, religion and marriage. They were responsible for administration, for meeting foreign ambassadors, for writing letters on Elizabeth's behalf. When Elizabeth became Queen, she immediately made William Cecil her Secretary of State, which was the monarch's principal advisor. And within the first 3 months she had appointed the rest of her Privy Council. One of the changes she made was to reduce the number of Privy Councillors that her sister had, which was around 50. She reduced the number down to 20. She was incredibly polite and diplomatic and thanked all the past councillors for their work because she really wanted to keep their support, or at the very least not turn them against her. She made the decision not to appoint her favourite. So a monarch's favourite was someone who gained preferential treatment and who was quite close to the monarch. The Queen's favourite was someone called Robert Dudley, who was the Earl of Leicester. William Cecil absolutely hated him, and if she had chosen to appoint him to the Privy Council, it would have made lots of other noblemen jealous. So for the first 4 years of her reign, she didn't appoint Robert Dudley to the Privy Council. She decided to keep 10 councillors who had served under her sister Mary because they were high-ranking, powerful and experienced. It was also a good way of keeping some of the Catholics on side. Some of the councillors she kept had even served her father and brother, so she felt she could trust them. She chose a lot of her new councillors from her relatives and trusted colleagues who had stood by her and helped keep her safe during Mary's reign. The full Privy Council did not always meet. Most decisions in business were carried out by a close inner circle of her most trusted advisors. Choosing who to appoint to her Privy Council was one of the first issues that she had to handle. But she was already making these plans before her sister died. Mary had been very ill, and Elizabeth was already thinking about who she might appoint when the time came. Elizabeth's decision-making about her Privy Council could be described as cautious and tactful, but decisive. She managed not to seriously upset anyone, and it became one of the most successful aspects of her reign. Next up, we have the problem of her gender and legitimacy. In the 16th century, female rulers were seen as unnatural and a liability, that they would be problematic and be more trouble than they were worth. A woman being in charge didn't fit with the ideal of womanhood of the time, that women should be silent and obedient and based in the home. Women were seen as too weak to control the powerful nobles, too weak to dispense justice, and too weak to make difficult decisions such as declaring war and far too weak to lead armies into battle. Elizabeth's sister Mary's reign had been disastrous and seemed to prove the point that women should not be in charge. Ultimately, though, there was nothing Elizabeth could do about this problem at the start of her reign. She just had to get on with it and prove that she was just as good a ruler as a man. And that would take time. Some people, particularly Catholics, questioned Elizabeth's claim to the throne. Her father Henry VIII had authorised his own divorce without permission from the Catholic Church, and he'd done that in order to marry Elizabeth's mother. This meant that Catholics, who believed that only the Pope could authorise a monarch's divorce, didn't think Henry had been legally married to Elizabeth's mother, thus making Elizabeth his illegitimate offspring. In the 16th century, children were only deemed to be legitimate if their parents were married. Again, there was very little Elizabeth could do about this. It was in the past. All she could do was try and win round the Catholics, and she was lucky because she was the daughter of the much loved and admired Henry VIII, and this gave her a popular edge with the people before she'd even done anything. Now we're going to have a look at religion. The reason why religion was a problem is that differences in religion could lead to civil war and make the country too divided to effectively fight back against a foreign invader. It causes divisions and splits within the country itself. All of the religious changes under previous monarchs, such as Mary I, Edward VI and Henry VIII, so that's Elizabeth's sister, brother and father, had led to lots of protests and rebellions. Elizabeth had to weigh up the effect that the religion of England could have on relations with other countries. France, Spain and Scotland were all Catholic in 1558. Her marriage suitors were all likely to be Catholic, and the Pope had the power to excommunicate Elizabeth from the Catholic Church if he chose, which meant that all her Catholic subjects no longer had to obey her. The Pope could also call on the Catholic powers of Europe to lead a religious crusade against her. So she had to be careful. She had to be careful not to offend or upset the Catholic powers of Europe too much. And also, the majority of people in England were traditional and did not like religious change. Most people were, in fact, Catholic, especially in the north of England. Her sister Mary's reign had reintroduced Catholicism back into England, and it meant that the bishops, the clergy, all the church organisation was Catholic. And Elizabeth would need to make changes to all of that if she made the country Protestant again. Elizabeth's personal religion was Protestantism, and she had appointed advisors who were mainly Protestant, so they all expected a Protestant national church. They expected Elizabeth to change the country back to Protestantism again. All the powerful Protestants who'd fled abroad during Mary's reign started to come back because they too expected Elizabeth's church to be Protestant. They came back expecting Elizabeth to change everything back from Catholicism to Protestantism. It seems that compromise would be the obvious solution. Try to keep both sides happy. But that ran the risk of pleasing no one. As a Protestant, Elizabeth couldn't accept Catholic doctrine and beliefs, and she certainly couldn't accept the Pope as the head of the Church of England. She also had a smaller group forming called the Puritans, who didn't want any form of decoration in church. They were the complete opposite of the Catholics. For the first few months of her reign, Elizabeth worshipped privately as a Protestant. She kept some symbols of Catholicism, such as crucifixes and candles, in her chapel, so that on the surface some elements of Catholicism remained. But behind the scenes, Elizabeth and her mainly Protestant Privy Council were drawing up the new religious settlement for the Church of England. The final problem that Elizabeth had to tackle was how to create peace and prosperity. This was important because the people of England would be more content and less likely to rebel against her if the country was peaceful and prosperous. There were two important things affecting prosperity: the quality of harvests and epidemics of disease. Neither of these could be controlled by the monarch. Elizabeth and her Privy Council were worried about rising food prices causing poverty, and that the poverty would cause unrest and rebellion. Prices for food rose very fast in the 1550s. For many people, their wages were losing value, which meant they couldn't buy as much as they usually could with the amount of money that they were earning. The biggest problem was when harvests failed for consecutive years, so one year after another, of bad harvests. This led to severe food shortages. After several bad harvests in the 1550s, the harvest in 1558 was very good, which gave Elizabeth breathing space. So remember that 1558 is the year that she becomes queen, and that harvest is a good one. But bad weather wasn't under her control, and bad weather could lead to bad harvests. So all she could do to solve this problem was just hope for great weather and great harvests and plenty of food for everyone. So you can see from all of the problems that we have looked at, from the first video through to this second one, that there were some problems that Elizabeth couldn't control and couldn't do very much about. She certainly prioritised solving some of the problems over others, and some she tackled with more success than others. Make sure you go back through the video and you collect all of your notes together. Make sure you have some precisely selected detail that you can use as evidence when you are talking about Elizabeth's problems at the start of her reign. Also, don't forget to subscribe and tap the notification bell so that you are made aware when these new GCSE history videos are uploaded. And don't forget to check out the description box below, which will have further information about where you can get some more resources for your GCSE history exams.